Good morning, everyone. How are you this morning? Nice to see you. Thank you for being here. I am Andy Mayer. I'm the president and CEO of the Mount Vernon Chamber of Commerce. And you know, I think at this point that the Skagit Chamber Alliance is all the chambers, 6 of us working together in the county. And the purpose is to help businesses succeed and communities to prosper. So we're here for that purpose. We're going to jump right in. Although I do want to thank Avenue Catering for providing the food, because I always forget to do that at the end. And the coffee. Lisa Case, you were fabulous. And those little quiches are to die for. Okay, going to get serious now. So I've asked the legislators to speak 4 minutes or so on the session from your point of view. And if you can, a little bit on our priorities that I sent to you, just so that we can kind of tie things back together. So that'll go, I don't know, 25 minutes or so. And then we will ask you to step up to the microphone with your questions, and we'll do the same on Zoom. So with that, let's get started. I think we're going to start with Clyde Shavers, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming today on a gloomier day. And I really appreciate everyone's involvement and staying aware of this year's legislative session. So to be straightforward, this session was definitely challenging, one of the more challenging sessions that I've been through. But I believe that with challenges comes opportunities to ensure that we protect those priorities that we all care about, to ensure that we increase and expand funding for programs that we all share and that we all use. And so, for example, as vice chair of the House Education Committee, that meant ensuring that we increase funding for special education. That meant ensuring that we sustain funding for that critical meals for our kids in our schools. That also ensures that we don't decrease funding in those essential early education programs like ECAP and TTK, Transition to Kindergarten. And as a member of the Healthcare Committee, that also means ensuring that we provide those critical health supports like community health centers to our many individuals and families that need it. And as a veteran myself, that ensures that our veterans continue to be supported, our military continues to be supported. So for example, I'm very proud to have introduced, sponsored, and passed House Bill 1102, which is one of the most significant expansions in our Veteran Service Officer program. These VSOs are critical, they're essential to ensuring that our veterans receive the benefits that they earned. So overall, in summary, even though we all know, and I believe that this session was challenging, it did bring opportunities for us to ensure that we come together, to try to collaborate, and to ensure that our discussions are amicable, and really ensuring that our government is more efficient, and our programs and our priorities still are in everyone's mind, and ensuring that we protect the survival of those programs. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Shavers. Let's go to Representative Paul, please, on Zoom.
Hey folks, can you hear me okay? Andy, can you hear me? So, can you hear me okay? So they can hear me on Zoom. Can you folks hear me?
There we go.
Can you folks hear me now?
We're good. Go
Excellent.
ahead, please.
Hey folks, I'm so sorry I'm not there in person. We had a last minute challenge here in Whidbey Island, and I've got to go to a 10 o'clock meeting as soon as we're done here on the island. So really appreciate the opportunity to give folks an update in all your good work for supporting businesses in our community. It is Rep. Shavers mentioned a really challenging session. I think this is the hardest session I've had, where we were looking at substantial budget cuts and also substantial revenue to try to offset some of those budget cuts. This is the first year I was chair of the Post-Secondary Education Workforce Committee. And when I'm not in the legislature, I work at Skagit Valley College. And so it really honored to be able to serve the legislature in that role, the House in that role. Despite our really good work to help try to protect the Washington College grant, we still saw higher education receive a $400 million cut in this budget, which is just very challenging, especially for our 4 years. Our community colleges also had a cut, but our 4 years, Western in particular, and Evergreen State down in Olympia, really got hammered in this session. I also serve on transportation and have served as vice chair of that committee to help write the ferry budget. And I continue to be the lead budget writer in the House for the ferry portion of the transportation budget. We're really excited that the bids for the 5 new hybrid electric ferries will be coming out this week. I believe those are unveiled this week, and excited to see that. We have a revenue package in the transportation that came out of the legislature that helped pay for those ferries and vital maintenance and preservation, and trying to complete big projects that we've already started across our state before we take on any new projects. And because of the budget challenges, this was a year where we saw fewer policies get passed because oftentimes those are associated with fiscal notes. So I only had 2 bills that passed. One was brought to me by the city of Oak Harbor. It helps provide some flexibility for cities as they're using their real estate excise tax dollars. So it did not increase REIT or change the amount collected, but allowed cities to have some flexibility we gave them during COVID. And cities told me that was really helpful to help expand housing and services to homelessness and public safety. So really excited to see that get to the governor's desk and signed into law. And also continued our work. I know a chamber priority is workforce training and workforce development. The project we started that I led a couple of years ago to help better connect our high school career and technical education programs, CTE programs, and the credits students can earn, CTE dual credit, to colleges and apprenticeship programs. So that is being, that pilot is seeing great results here in our region. We had a bill to continue that for 2 years, and then we'll hopefully in the next legislative session expand that to other regions in the state. And then look forward to your questions at the end of the presentations. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Representative Paul. Let's go to Senator Mazzal, please.
Good morning. I will concur. This is my 6th session and one of the most difficult ones. And there were a lot of reasons why. Let's start off by first acknowledging that we have a spending problem in the state of Washington. And our caucus came out with a budget in the very beginning that was a no cuts, no tax budget. We essentially decided that we tax enough, and that what we could do was delay some of the spending, which is what got us into the problem we're in currently, but that there were a lot of things we could see that were just not tenable. So I sat on the Ag and Natural Resource Committee with Senator Wagner. I'm ranking on health and long-term care. I'm on Ways and Means. I'm on rules. I'm also deputy chair of the caucus. So we began with a budget our caucus presented that was, as I said, no tax, no cuts. We delayed and we came up with a balanced budget. That is not what we ended up with in the end. almost, well, in excess of $9 billion in increased taxes. They aren't all taxes. We increased a lot of fees, and included in that are liquor and cannabis board fees. We increased significantly. So if you own a restaurant and serve alcohol, if you have a grocery store, serve alcohol, any alcohol distribution, we increased fees or increased taxes. We increased taxes on grocery warehouses. We have the fourth highest food prices in the nation, in the state of Washington, and we increased the B&O tax on grocery warehouses. What impact do you think that will have on our food costs? This was all the way across the board. We have increased B&O taxes on doctors and hospitals. We continue to struggle with cost and access in the healthcare industry. What impact do you think that will have on that? It will increase cost and decrease access long term. Our hospitals are running in a negative margin now across the state of Washington, and we just increased their cost of business. Primary physicians are not only are we losing numbers, but we have less that want to go into that business. What impact do you think that will have on that? So in addition, the emotional toll of this session was great. We lost one of the members of the Senate a week before the end of session, and outrunning and died suddenly. One of our own caucus members lost his wife, 53 years of age, perfect health. She died the Saturday before the end of session. So this was very difficult, and we went places that I had hoped that we would never go in our state government when it came to controlling prices, setting rates, and increasing taxes and fees. And we are seeing a decline in our tax income, and it's due to the economy. So now was not the time to increase all of these, but to step back and say, okay, let's take a minute and see where our economy is going, because increasing taxes doesn't necessarily spur on an economy. So let it go at that.
Thank you, Senator Mazzal. Let's go to the 39th. Representative Sam Lowe, Representative Sam Lowe would have been here, but he is with the governor. He has a bill that's being signed today, so he could not join us, but we do have, Senator Keith Wagner, please.
Thank you. Sam's getting a bill signed down there, and Carolyn has some other things, so I'll be representing the 39th because it's close to home. I'm Senator Keith Wagner. I reside over in Cedar-Woolley, sit on Ways and Means, Law and Justice, and Ag and Natural Resources, as Ron mentioned. I'm also the minority whip. So when you're in the majority, you get to call it challenging. When you're in the minority, I would call it brutal. It was the most brutal session of 8 that I have been through. Senator Mazzal talked a little bit about the budgeting. It's the biggest tax increase in Washington state history, and that including all the fees that were added on. For example, hunting and fishing licenses went up 38%. But your hunting and fishing opportunities did not increase. The Discover Pass, I think, doubled, along with all the other taxes that were required to feed a budget that, from our perspective, was totally unnecessary. Ron talked about the Republican budget, and we don't expect the minority to just embrace our budget, but would have been nice if some of our ideas have been incorporated in the budget that is really just going to increase cost on our constituents across the state. And that's not to say that that doesn't fund important things, because there's lots of important things that do get funded. The problem is there's an infinite number of great deserving ideas and programs out there, but there's not an infinite dollar pot in Olympia to take care of that. So what we need to exercise is some discipline and say no to things that we have traditionally said yes to and not say yes to more things. So what I tried to do in Olympia, which is pretty much aligned with my party, I had 3 priorities: public safety, affordability, and education in the future of our children. So how did we do on those things? On public safety, I mentioned I sit on Law and Justice. I did not get a single bill through the Law and Justice Committee, which is a little frustrating, but I give us about a B. I think there was progress made, could have been better. We started out with a desire, I think it was 100 million to purchase more police officers. That ended up in a fashion that was a little bit diluted for my taste, but we got more money for law enforcement, and we did that together. So, you know, we're talking a little bit divided here, but there's a lot of work that we do in Olympia that is bipartisan. And you should know that about 85% of the bills that get passed are unanimous or near unanimous. The last 10 to 15% we fuss about a little bit more. So I think we did fair on public safety this time around. Affordability, I would give us a D minus. Costs increased, and because this is a chamber event, the things that most directly affect your members are the B&O taxes that went up. And also we took away a lot of preferences that have traditionally been tax preferences to keep our businesses competitive. Things like precious metals, which it's kind of crazy to me that you're taxing money because coins are money and shouldn't be taxed again. But we took away the tax preference that has kept those businesses competitive. Ron talked about taking away or adding a B&O to grocery warehousing. We did the same with pharmacy warehousing at a time when medical costs are so high and people are already struggling. And did I get that wrong? Because I tried to take it out. The House did us a favor and took it out. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Rep. Rammel. Tried to get it out in Ways and Means and was unsuccessful. So, and the last thing, education, I think we went the wrong direction by allowing a pre-McCleary environment. So the courts told us 8 years ago, you're doing it wrong, get it right. Every kid deserves an equal education, whether you're in a small rural district or you're in a big urban district where property values are high and you can earn a lot of money with a small percentage of property tax increase. We fixed it in the first year in 2018. In 2019, there was a levy lid lift, which was going back the wrong direction. And this session, we have increased the amount of local governments to raise levy money yet again, which is a race to inequity. Because if you live in Bellevue in a rich district and you raise 5% or 5 cents on 1,000 property value, that's millions of dollars. To do the same thing in concrete or even in Burlington Edison, you're talking $2, $3, $4 per thousand. So it's a bad system. I think we enabled that bad system. I'd give us about a C+ on education this time around. I passed 2 bills. One is fairly inconsequential, had to do with county clerks and records retention. But one that I am very proud of is Veterans Medical Foster Homes, which is a federally run program that had been stymied in Washington State because we add on requirements and inspections. I think it was voted unanimously, and I had a lot of support. Thanks, Rep. Shavers on the other side of the aisle, working on veterans issues. So that will allow veterans who need medical attention, can't really live on their own, to live in a kind of community house, up to 3 veterans, where they will age in place, not be homeless, and be able to get the care that they need. All that we had to do was say, Washington State will essentially be hands-off as long as it meets our requirements that we would expect under our health agencies and DCYF. So that felt good, and it was a good win.
Thank you, Senator.
Am I done? I got one more thing to say, just so you understand the magnitude of the work that we went through down there. There were 2,300 bills that were introduced. Of those, I think about 400 will go to the governor's desk. That's a lot of picking and choosing and debates and public forums that we have to listen to, and amendments and changes and voting. So that's why it was a very brutal session, in my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Wagner. Let's go to the 40th. Representative Rommel, please.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks to the Skagit Chamber for always hosting these events. This is a great way for us to touch base before session and then again after. I like the report card approach of how do we do, scoring each item. I guess I'll just touch on a couple of themes that have already been touched on. This was an incredibly challenging session for the reasons that have been listed. I don't think you'll hear any dispute there. And I really want to agree with what Senator Wagner said about bipartisanship. Just to underscore that, the bill that Representative Lowe is down in Olympia for a bill signing for he was the prime sponsor as a Republican, and I'm the second sponsor on that bill. It's a small piece of legislation that makes things a little bit better for pharmacy benefits for small pharmacies, and not controversial. Didn't get a lot of headlines, but a lot of the work that we do is of that kind. Everybody agrees. You just do a little bit of homework to figure out how to solve a problem, come up with an agreement, work together to get it across the finish line. And that is much of the work that happens often unnoticed in Olympia. And that's a good example. And it's usually bipartisan and collaborative. And in both chambers, we have working relationships across the aisle and between the two chambers. I'll mention just a couple of pieces of legislation that I worked on that relate to the chamber's priorities. We talked about housing has been a top priority for us in Washington State for the last number of years. I got two bills that the governor has now signed across the finish line. The first relates to accessory dwelling units and allowing self-certification for architects. So it essentially takes a step off the process for city plans review. If the architect is willing to take that sort of responsibility on. This is an idea that's worked in other states and accelerates permitting, takes some of the red tape out, makes it easier for local governments. Obviously, if things are not done properly, then it has to be fixed when there's an inspection at the end of that process. I'm excited about this. I think ADUs is a good place to start as a trial, and if it works, then we could expand it to other kinds of construction as a way to continue to build out more housing to meet that growing need. The other piece of legislation I got across the finish line on housing relates to the multifamily tax exemption. This is something I've worked on before and continuing to improve. But really, this is a way that our local governments can offer incentives to developers to build more affordable housing in dense areas of the community, to incentivize that density in places where it may not be picking up on its own. And, we're continuing to perfect and improve that program, including making more of the units affordable for the long term. So excited to get that one finished, and hopeful that our local governments will pick up where we left off and utilize those tools that we're offering. In the housing space, we passed, I think, a total of about 16 bills aimed at increasing housing supply one way or another. Those are just two of them. The governor has had a big signing ceremony last week where he highlighted a number of those. He also signed rent stabilization, which is a policy that I've worked on for a number of years. The bill that got across the line this year was not, I was not the prime sponsor on, but I was excited to support it. It's a compromise. It's not where all of the tenants wanted, and it's not what all of the landlords wanted, but it will cap the extreme rent increases that I'm convinced are frequently a component driving homelessness in our communities. Look forward to more conversation about that, and I'm sure that in future years we'll continue to perfect that policy. The other policy area that priority for the chamber is that I worked on is infrastructure. I've heard from many businesses in Skagit County about challenges with electricity supply. We had a transmission bill that unfortunately we did not get across the finish line this year, but we'll be coming back next year to continue to work on that. I've got one bill that I just heard is going to be signed by the governor tomorrow on thermal energy networks. And this is a way to substantially increase the energy efficiency for neighborhood networks of heating systems. We've got one of those going in Bellingham right now, and a number of other ones around Washington State. This energy efficiency is the cheapest and most effective kind of new energy supply. And so excited to continue to support that. I guess I do just want to respond. I imagine we'll have a lot more time to talk about the budget and tax policy, but I just want to respond a little bit to what was said. And I will just say that we started off this year facing a budget deficit over the coming 4 years. We balance our budget in 4-year periods of $16 billion. There is no math that says you can come up with $16 billion with no cuts and no new taxes. That math simply does not work. We had difficult choices in front of us this year. I think all of us stayed awake at night worrying about the impacts of decisions, who would be hurt by cuts that we were making, who would be impacted by tax increases that we were contemplating. We came up with what I think is a balanced approach. Part of the reason that you're able to sort of list off all of the different fees and taxes that were increased is because rather than focus on one big hit to one sector, is we spread that impact across a number of different places where inflation hasn't kept up with the cost of fees, for example. And so the intention there is and has been to make sure that we continue to have all of the sectors of our economy paying their fair share for the benefits that we're able to provide. I didn't love all of the cuts that I voted for. I didn't love all of the taxes that I voted for. But overall, I think it is the best approach that we could have brought to a very difficult situation. Look forward to more conversation on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Rommel. Let's go to Senator Liz Lovelet, please.
There we go. Hey there, Liz Lovelet, fifth generation Skagitonian. I'm the Deputy Majority Leader of the Washington State Senate, Vice Chair of Local Government, and I serve on Energy, Environment, Technology, and on the Transportation Committee with my colleagues, Rep. Paul and Rep. Rammel, help lead the Ferry Legislator Caucus. Boy, I would disagree. I would say it was brutal for us too, because, you know, we had to take all those votes on taxes. And in fact, we had to take all the votes on cuts. You know, I did go through the Republican budget, and since, you know, you guys put a couple shots across the bow, I will say the math didn't math. And for a number of reasons, you can't make something out of nothing. And we had a lot of expenses that needed to get paid, a lot of inflation that had caught up with us. And the Republican budget did not pay for any of our collective bargaining, and it swept the entirety of the Climate Commitment Act in order to invest in the Working Families Tax Credit and other general fund purposes. It also didn't fully fund education, and we needed to take some bold step forward, particularly in special education, where we have been woefully undercapitalized in our classrooms. So those are just a couple high-level statements about the difference between the budgets. And at the end of the day, regardless of the kind of chaos coming out of the federal government, the definite uncertainty that people are feeling on the street because of that, we had to show up and we had to govern and we had to make tough decisions. The reason we got into this budget situation was some of these things that I mentioned before, inflation, rising cost of staff, but it also has to do with kind of the slump that happened after COVID. The federal government was injecting a lot of money into our communities in order to help sustain a lot of programs that were necessary for people to stay out of homelessness and to stay in medical care. And after that, what we found was there was a tremendous amount of unmet need in our communities that we needed to continue to backfill. And states across the US were experiencing these same budget challenges. At the same time, we did have some ambitious spending things. We wanted to fully fund childcare to make sure that for all of those businesses out there, that the people who need to come to work have the ability to come to work because they have access to quality childcare. We needed to invest in more transit options. We need to invest in things like the Anacortes Ferry Terminal. There are a lot of big projects, and unfortunately, stuff costs money and people cost money. Kids cost money. There's no way to get around the fact that when government provides things for people, people's lives are improved. And so at the end of the day, we had to make some really tough decisions. Now, as to that tax structure, we have one of the top most regressive tax structures in the United States. It is from back in the horse and buggy days at the turn of the last century that brought us the tax code. We are an outlier among all 50 states for having the B&O tax at all. And I will say from the Senate perspective, we had an open door policy for 8 months preceding session and all throughout about coming to the table to talk about different kinds of revenue that might be less impactful across the board. When the governor said he would not sign a budget that had the wealth tax in it, that completely truncated our ability to think outside the box and to try to put our tax burden where it belongs with the folks that can most afford to pay it. That said, our B&O changes fell in 2 primary places. We added a service fee to tech businesses that currently were not paying any taxes on those services. So think IT software, consulting of those types. That is a huge untapped market in Washington state. And now they're going to have to pay their fair share of taxes just like every other business in Washington state. The B&O service taxes went on businesses that were grossing $250 million and above. So yes, there were some taxes on smaller businesses like alcohol establishments, things like that. And a lot of those fees had not been raised in decades. Same with the Discover Pass, same with the hunting and fishing license fees. So I hear my timer went off. I'm feeling a little feisty. I got lots of questions that I can answer moving forward. Oh, and I had 2 big bills. One had to do with making sure that we can have more affordable housing options and home ownership by improving our subdivision processes as it relates to multifamily housing, and not insignificantly, a complete overhaul of our recycling system.
Thank you, Senator Leavitt. Let's go to questions from the audience and from those. Come on up, please. And I do think I'm quite sure I don't have to say anything along the lines that we can disagree, but do it civilly if we are so inclined. That is not directed at you, Lance. Step right up.
Hey, thank you to all of you for being here today. It's great. And I know it's been a tough session. I know my 3 visits down to Olympia, there was a lot of tough discussions. One of the toughest things I kept hearing was we need to find revenue. And I understand that, but I got, this is a 2-part question. First of all, how do you think coming out of this legislative session, the direction we're heading is going to help businesses in our state, both large and small, and to attract business? And number 2, with this huge amount of taxes that have been added, when do you think it's too much government all the way around in our state and we need to be looking at being less big government? Any of the panel, it's for anybody and everybody to answer.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. And I think what I will say again is that when we came into this, we were facing a challenge with a $16 billion deficit over a 4-year period. And $7 billion of that is filled with cuts. And I know that folks will say, there's government waste, and we did find some government waste to cut. I would argue that the tax exemption for buying and selling gold coins was one of the examples of government waste that we could cut. That's about $25 million a year that we were able to find. That covers, but those things are few and far between. The cuts that we made were that were more substantial were much harder to make. Things like delaying ECAP for early childhood education. We know that when we invest in children from lower income families being able to get early childhood education, that pays dividends immediately in terms of their parents and their families' ability to participate in the workforce. And it pays dividends over that child's life as they show up for kindergarten ready to learn. We see that in terms of their high school graduation rates, their participation in college. You see it in terms of how they interact with their families in their 40s. Early childhood education is some of the best money that we can spend long term, but we had to delay investments. That's $1 billion that we were able to save. But that was not an easy decision. So I don't think we made any of our choices cavalierly, but there were not easy choices. I really do disagree that there was a way to do this to meet our responsibility to have a balanced budget, to do this with no cuts and no new taxes. And certainly it's not possible to make cuts of that magnitude that aren't impactful. I think those are important investments that over the long term, we ought to keep working towards being able to make as a society. And that's my continued commitment. We're not going to get it perfect every year, but we're able to keep moving forward.
So to answer your question about how much is too much, I think we're well past that. I think we went past that a while ago. And I want you to consider that over the past decade, roughly, the operating budget, the Washington State's budget has increased 100%. Now, I don't know how many of you in here over that same time period got 100% increase in what you make, but I'm guessing it's not many. We simply have a spending problem. And there was some talk about the rent caps, for example. So I'm a small landlord. Now I am limited in what I am allowed to charge for my own property. But who's the worst landlord in Washington? You all pay rent to live here. You pay rent in the form of all the fees that we talked about, all the taxes, the fuel taxes, your property taxes. Who's the worst landlord? When we have a spending problem in Olympia, we just raise the rent, and that's what just happened. And it's a shame because we haven't exercised discipline. And I'll tell you what, one of the sticking points was, Senator Loveland mentioned it, the collective bargaining agreement. Tough times call for tough decisions. Suspending the collective bargaining agreement, which is what is essentially it's the raises that our state employees will get. In 38 of 39 counties, state employees make more than the median income. They make more than the average citizen. And that's fine because it's hard work and they're hard workers and they deserve to be paid fairly. But when you have a $16 billion deficit, maybe they could suspend their next raise for a couple of years. And our proposal was simply this. We're going to give you $5,000 instead of the percentage raise that was guaranteed. How many of you would like to get $5,000 more a year in your paycheck? That sounds like a windfall to me. And for those who make state employees who made under $80,000, it's more than they would have gotten anyway under the collective bargaining agreement. So that's the kind of tough decision-making that we should have made in Olympia. And I believe we went too far long ago when we outpaced our spending, our state spending. We outpaced what all of us get in terms of typical raises and increases in our money, and we all have to manage our households. I think we've done well, I think I said already, affordability D- job for the state in that respect.
So would the gentleman yield to a question? You, Keith.
Certainly.
Okay. So, we hear that line a lot about we have a spending problem. And as somebody who has gone in and spent quite a bit of time with the budget and going over all the policy bills, I mean, what government is providing are things like schools and hospitals and food assistance and roads, libraries and courthouses and all of those kinds of things. What are the spending problem issues that you are highlighting in your spending problem statement?
Well, the first one that I just mentioned was the wages that we're paying our state employees, which is a major driver of cost in Olympia. And I would say it doesn't do anybody any good to say it now, but it is true that we have been saying this for years. This is unsustainable. I remember asking the state budget analyst in one of his briefings, I think 2 years ago, and they had all these optimistic curves about how our revenue was going to go up. I said, well, do you have statistics on how often you were right about that? He couldn't answer the question because it was obvious to our side of the aisle that at some point this was going to level off and we were going to drop off the cliff. And that's what happened. So I guess one of the advantages, fair or not, of being in the minority is I get to point at the things that have been done wrong. I also don't have my finger on that lever to make changes, but that's my opinion, that we have a spending problem.
So this is an interesting conundrum. And, we've got three budgets. We've got a capital budget, transportation budget, and the operating budget. The capital and transportation were bipartisan budgets. They were worked on through the entirety of the process and were agreed upon in the end. And they had bipartisan support when they came to the final votes on the floor. The operating budget was not bipartisan. We sit in a minority in the Senate of 19 to 30. They have no problem passing whatever they want without our participation, as was exhibited in the operating budget. They went to conference, we were locked out of the room. We weren't invited. So we have very little impact. We can fight it in ways and means. We can argue on the floor. But if you look at the final vote, it was 30 to 19 on the operating budget. We did not support going forward on that. We didn't feel. So there's lots of excuses. There's lots of reasons. I've spent a lifetime in business. I bought my first 4-H calf from my parents at 9 years of age. I've served on boards of directors of farm co-ops, but one of them, 15 years, Skagit Farmer Supply, 5 years as as chair of the board, the largest private entity in Skagit County. I served on the Land O'Lakes corporate board, a Fortune 200 company. We had $15 billion in sales. I understand business. I understand the cost to business. I understand what labor costs business, and I understand what it costs to replace labor in business. But I also understand that the costs of doing business in Washington state have almost reached an untenable level. We've got 10 employees. Paid family and medical leave, which almost went broke. We had to take $200 million out of general funds to subsidize that to keep it going. That cost is going to continue to increase on a percentage basis for these employees. Is it bad? No. I had an employee this winter who utilized that very effectively. The problem is that it's designed poorly so that the high wage earners take much more advantage of it than the low wage earners, those people that we really need it for. These are the problems, are developing systems which only cost more when we're seeing the margins of business decrease over time. And these margins are affected by all of these things. And we talked about rent stabilization. I don't see, we have a supply problem. That's why we've got high rents. We've got a supply problem. We need to increase supply. We need to get largely government out of the way of building these facilities, whether it is multiple family, whether it's single family, whatever the case is. Now we have to do it sensibly, but we have stood in the way of that progress. And so an answer to the question, I believe government has reached a point in time. I'm just reading a book now called Abundance. Very interesting. Don't agree with all of it. Some of their figures are completely wrong. But the truth of the matter is that we've reached a point of stagnation that's not sustainable in the system we currently have. We need to back up, take a look at it. Government, again and again, though it, I don't doubt the positive thoughts that go into creating many of these things, the end result, the unintended consequences, they're stymieing all sorts of business. And one of those is housing. And we can't pay, the government cannot build the housing that's needed. We've got to get private industry engaged in moving forward on that. And yes, we've put $500 million of our capital budget into housing, but that isn't the solution. The solution is getting private business amped up and building that housing by not creating such a high cost for land and labor and inputs and all of these other things so that they get a return.
The previous two biennial operating budgets were passed with bipartisan support.
I'll just jump in and a couple of other points to maybe make. First, abundance is on my reading stack. I think it's about 2 down. So I look forward to a chance to discuss that with you, Senator Mazzol. I guess I do just want to bring up a couple of things on the not funding our collective bargaining agreements. We would be in real trouble as a state if we're not able to follow through on the commitments that we make to our workforce. I simply do not view that as a realistic place to make cuts. The other cut that I would just offer as an example is the Rainier Valley School. This is a facility that is there to support developmentally disabled adults. And enrollment in that school over the last decade or so has dropped from over 300 to between 50 and 60 right now. And one of the proposals for saving money as well as improving conditions for many of the people living there, some of the most vulnerable people in our society, was to close that facility and create pathways for them to move to either other facilities or find care in their community. It's a reasonable, I think, a common sense approach to cutting an area of state funding where we're simply approaching that differently. It was an incredibly contentious issue to try to, and we did not get bipartisan support for making those cuts to close that facility. In the end, because of a desire to make it collaborative, we scaled that one back, and we're not able to commit to closing it on a timeline, but instead just said, we won't accept new admittances there. So that was an important place that we could have made some cuts that we did not. That is frankly the kind of situation we dealt with each time we were trying to look for government efficiency. Last thing I want to just really highlight when we're talking about changes in the tax code that affects businesses. Single biggest increase is the surcharge for the advanced computing industry. Here in this room, we can say it, it's Amazon and Microsoft are going to take the biggest, are going to make the biggest contribution in terms of that new tax. The surcharge for businesses over 250 million in global sales. Again, this larger businesses. One of our commitments coming in is that we wanted this, any changes in our tax code to be improvements in our upside down and regressive tax code. I think we hit that. I think we hit that standard. We were also able to fully exempt businesses under 5 million from the B&O increase for service businesses. So again, protecting those smallest businesses was a priority that we were able to maintain as we wrestled with these difficult decisions.
By a show of hands, how many of you are on Fish and Wildlife? Okay. And then another show of hands, how many of you are business owners? Okay. Keith, you could raise your hand because you're, okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, former says a lot. So my question or concern, I should say, I have a lot of concerns. This state is out of control. I mean, it's ridiculous. If we didn't live on family property that I love and adore, I would be so out of here. It's so restrictive. It's so abusive to business owners and property owners. It's ridiculous. And the spending does need to get in control. And you talk about Rainier Valley, and I'm surprised it's still open, but closing it, don't make the mistake that was made with our mental health hospitals and just dump them out on the street. That's because that's a sore point. Anyway, back to Fish and Wildlife. Currently, they have a commission. There is not one single hunter, not one single fisher person on that commission. And that needs to change. The people that are on that have no idea of the needs of the fishing and the wildlife and the management. And I know Governor Ferguson had made a suggestion to change that, but that still hasn't happened. And now that the fishing and hunting fees have gone up so high, it's just another reason to leave. Okay, Keith?
Yeah, I can, first of all, there's good news in that respect. And I think the new governor recognized that we needed some more variety, I'll call it, on the Game Commission, and suspended a couple of appointments. And then we voted out of ag, and I don't know if it got to the governor's desk yet. We got it on the floor, and we had 3 new commissioners who made me feel very comfortable as someone who hunts and fish and thinks that those things are important. I think we got some great candidates. 2 that I knew, and one that came from Anacortes that Senator Lovelet knew very well. He was super engaging, and I think that we're on a better path. I did have a bill to change the way that the commission comes up with nominees. The chair wanted to give the new governor some time before changing things, so maybe we'll look at that next year. But I think we have 3 new potential commissioners, and it's good news. It kind of meets the criteria that you mentioned.
How many commissioners are there total?
7, yeah.
Okay, so that's a start.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to having people who think differently on there than I do, who are more conservation minded, and those voices are important too, but it's important to have some balance. And I think that we got closer to that this session. And I want to give full credit to the governor for doing what I thought was the right thing, to like make up his own mind so that his appointees were his appointees and not vestiges of a previous administration.
Yeah. Yep, I appreciated that.
So we did have a Ruckelshaus report that came back that showed the dysfunction on the commission. And so then pulling back some appointments of the previous governor, two of those are actually returning members that we approved. One was a brand new member. I think all of them represent the interests of what the Fish and Wildlife Commission is supposed to represent.
Thank you. Let's get to the next question, please.
My name's Tina Champeau, and I live in the area Cedar Woolley. And thank you for doing this morning. So first of all, I'd like to address, I'm a former state employee, and I worked for DSHS for 23 years. My retirement, which I retired in 2012, comes out of the union. Everything from supervisor, not including supervisor forward, comes out of Washington Management Services. So I didn't retire in Fat City, but I know that there's kind of an inequity. We had to work really hard. We didn't have enough employees to cover what we had to do. And I actually issued probably hundreds of thousands of dollars and had to be correct and had to have my cases audited in the 23 years I worked there. I think there's really inequity because some of the people in management should have been fired, but it's not the same on both sides. So I do understand what Senator Wagner was saying about state employees. With that said, with this tax hike that came up and the largest tax bundle in Washington State's history, it's really nice that everybody's got a program that's going to help them, but people like me are not going to be helped. I will probably be out of my home eventually. So with that said, I would like to ask a question. Maybe Senator Wagner can answer it for me. I'm a little confused about one of the bills, and I really apologize that I don't have the number, but my phone goes off with scam calls and I can't get them to stop, so I had to turn it off. The bill that gives reparation, I think of $120,000 for a mortgage down. I don't quite understand that bill. Could that be explained to me?
Well, I will explain that I voted against that bill. The current bill was a change to a program that was already in existence. And what it had to do with was racist policies that the state had, and they did have racist policies called redlining, where certain groups were not allowed to buy property in certain areas. The underlying policy intent, and I think it's misguided, but I'll just try to look at it from the perspective of the people who proposed the bill. The underlying policy's intent is to kind of reverse that or fix it for generations of people whose family lived in Washington State and was not open to the same opportunities as other people were. So originally it was a revolving loan. And that kind of seems reasonable to me, sort of like our Public Works Trust Fund. People get a loan to make a down payment on a home, and they have to qualify based on their lineage and their family's history, and then they would pay that back and the next person could take it. So I didn't like the policy, but at least it made sense to have a revolving loan. The bill that was discussed and passed this session says that loan can be forgivable. In other words, it becomes a grant. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think it's public gifting of money, and it also is going to undermine the future of that program if you like that program. So for me, I don't like the idea of trying to fix historical wrongs. Let's move ahead. That's my personal philosophy, but other people have a different philosophy.
Does it exclude Europeans and Asians? Does it exclude?
Yes.
Europeans and Asians?
So I tried to get this amended just so it would be fair while we're trying to be fair. Japanese and Chinese are excluded from the program, as are Jewish members who also had the same restrictions. There was a study done, and I guess the results of the study, or the opinion of the study, was that those groups are doing too well now and don't need the help. I find it odd to fix racial injustice, but you also have a racial exclusion. And that's why I proposed an amendment to allow those groups, even though I didn't love the underlying policy. But my amendment was not accepted. So it is what it is when you're in the minority. Sometimes you get what you get.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, the basis of the program is whether you or your family was excluded from being able to purchase housing in parts of Washington. Those exclusions happened based on race. Participation in this program is not based on race. It's based on whether you or your family was excluded historically. And I guess I would also just add that this is one of many programs that Washington has to support development and access to housing for low-income folks in Washington. That bipartisan capital budget that we talked about earlier has the largest investment in the Housing Trust Fund that we've ever made, over $600 million, so that lower-income folks can have access to our housing market. I think that's something that we all agree on. This one piece of it, there's some disagreement about how it should be administered, but largely, I think this is an area of agreement.
And I'd throw in, I think when we're taking care of state employees, it's not just during their time of work, it's also during their retirement. And one of the things that we were trying to do this year was to give our retirees a COLA, because we understand that when you were, for like we hear from school teachers, they retired in the 1980s. Well, they're still living on 1980s dollars. And that doesn't translate to what the cost of living is in 2025. I'm also firmly supportive of having a more robust senior property tax exemption, because we do want people to be able to age in place with dignity, and especially after they put in a lifetime of work to the state.
All right, looks like, well, we're out of time, but we have another question and happy to have it.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Andy Arvidsson. I'm president of Washington Council of the Blind. I live in Anacortes. I'm here to talk about education, which affects, and Liz Lovett said something about libraries. I spent some time in Olympia April 2nd, talking about library funding. A lot of library funding has been cut. We're talking about education. How can people be educated if we cut library services? I understand that our library budgets for the state through federal and state funding went from 12 million to 3.9 million. One of the libraries that is gravely affected is the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library, which I'm a patron of, and there is approximately 250,000 blind and low vision people in Washington State. And Washington Talking Book and Braille Library serves a number of those, plus it also serves people with other disabilities that have reading challenges. And how can, with education being the way it is, can we cut library services down to 3.9 million instead of 12?
I think that cut that you're talking about is from the federal government, our portion of what the federal government usually sends to support our library system.
Well, a lot of it is, but some of it is also state.
Sure. So, in a universe of painful budget cuts, we didn't fully capitalize some of the library projects, but we tried to keep most of our library funding in place. But, I think what you're speaking to is some of the larger challenges that we have on the horizon coming from the federal government. I have a close friend whose federal food stamps went from $131 a month to $46 a month. I don't understand how people are expected to survive that, and the looming threats to cutting Medicare reimbursement, the looming threats to cutting disability benefits. And we here in Washington want to make sure we have a robust enough system in place to take care of folks as these challenges come. I love libraries. I want all the libraries. Maybe that's part of our rampant spending that is causing all these problems. But I think that when you invest in your community like that, then you get the benefit of people being educated, of people being able to support themselves and, have these kinds of programmatic things that improve our quality of life.
I've spoken with the director from Washington Talking Book and Braille Library in Seattle, and they're going to have to start laying people off and locking doors. And they're not going to be able to produce literature. If they can't produce literature, how do people get education and get a job?
Thank you. That is a good question. We do kind of need to wrap up, but does anybody else want to say anything about the impact of things that are happening on the federal level, or would you like to leave that alone?
Well, I would like to hear that, yes. I know that IMLS, the International Museum of Library Sciences and Services, has been cut. I know that National Library Service is only funded through September 30th. And how does that affect when our education is as poor as it is in our country right now? How can we, I know it's a budget issue, but how can we, gut feeling, cut library services out?
I kind of think that was answered. Andy, I don't know.
Senator Lovett's saying she thinks it's for us. I don't know. We wouldn't vote for the budget, so I'm not sure how that is, but I'll use it as an opportunity to talk about why I went to Olympia. I went to Olympia for one reason, and that was to bring back money to build the Cedar Woolley Library that we have now. So I thought if I could just go down there one session and accomplish nothing else and bring the library back to the city, I will have done okay. So I feel like I've done okay. We got that library built. I don't know how it treats visually impaired materials, but I think that your local librarian may work with you. It doesn't solve the problem that you're talking about. It doesn't, and I acknowledge that. But also, I did not vote for that budget.
I'll interrupt you. Our local librarian doesn't know much about vision impaired stuff.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, this has been interesting, and I really appreciate legislators that you do what you do, and that you obviously put your heart and soul in it. And it doesn't seem even like a whole lot of fun some years, and you've made that clear. I also know it's late nights. I don't even know how you do that. And then jobs and responsibilities as well. So I actually want to thank you for what you do. Did we all love everything? I'm sure we didn't, but that goes 50-50 most of the time. So I think we'll just adjourn with that, and so appreciate you participating today, and all of you here and the few on Zoom land. Thank you very much.
Thank you.